This week's channel message from the angels is a answer to one of your questions, which is about the soul journey. What is the soul journey? How does it work? What is it all about? So welcome back to my channel, you guys. And for those of you who are new here, my name is Ann Tucker. I am a trance channel. I channel from the angelic realm, and that means I go into a deep meditative state. I raise my awareness up as high as I can go, a little higher. I connect, the messages come through, and I share them here with you on YouTube. And so this message is it's a more complicated one than usual, but they're trying to describe something to us that is it's a difficult conceptually for us because it's not part of our earthly experience. So I think they do a great job of it, and it gets clearer as we go. So they kind of go into more and more depth explaining what this journey is, but they give us a very specific answer about how were we created? Like what are we? And how are we created? What are we doing? What is our sort of our mission or our journey, right? And how are we doing that journey? So how does this all work? And it's really about the sort of the birth of our souls, and then our soul becoming a deeper, richer, more powerful expression of the light that we carry. So I hope you guys enjoy the message. If you would like to hear more like this one, don't forget, if you haven't already, to like and then subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much. Here is what they say. They say, you are wondering about the focus of the soul contract. You are wishing to understand its beginnings in true form and how it arrives as you are. This journey undertaking you have been on instigates with human thought form, with the amazement instilled in you from God's breath. And so through this whole thing, they refer to God, the word God, and they use he, and that's just me. That's how I think of God. That's how I speak of it. So that's just, they're using my word. So just know that. So please substitute your own. All right. So, okay. So this is really interesting. In the next couple paragraphs, they go into describing the experience of a soul beginning, of the beginning of humanity as like our souls, our collective consciousness, all of us. They begin to describe it in like as in real time, as if time doesn't exist, as if all things are happening at once. So there's no, it's literally like they're telling us, it's like kind of play by play, calling like this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. So it's very different, but it makes sense when you look at it from their perspective. There is no such thing as time, that all these things do happen at once. So anyways, we'll go through it and I can help to explain it as we go. All right. So here is how they describe it. They say, there is an opening throughout humanity that opens to the source light. A sense of this being overcome, overwhelmed, overtaken. A light forms throughout you now, an instigation of his light. It infuses you from below and above, all around you now. This sense of self in the beginning, and if infusion of light form is taken, a sense of self develops. So this paragraph, in my opinion, is about the first moments of our awareness of as we became something. And it's the description of it, sort of a play-by-play. What did that feel like when we first were born as souls? And so they're describing it as sort of like an opening so like it's sort of the chicken and egg thing, is when did we first become conscious of ourselves and how did that consciousness come in? So they described it as those first moments, those few seconds of awareness, is that this feeling of being overcome, overwhelmed, overtaken, that light is all around us, right? They say that light it infuses you from below and above and all around. So with an infusion of this light. So those first moments of awareness felt like this, right? Being overcome, overwhelmed, overtaken, light everywhere. So it's like I guess the same way that it would feel the first time you were born, the first moment of being born and taking your first breath, how that must have felt. That sense of being dormant and then all of a sudden being illuminated, right? And I think that's what they're trying to describe step by step in this paragraph. So it's the sense of self in the beginning, an infusion of light form is taken, right? A sense of self developed. So that's important. An infusion of light form is taken. So this is how they're describing the first moments of conscious awareness that humanity had. Super cool, right? Super, super cool. All right. Let me close this so I can see you guys better. There we are. Yay. So excited. Thank you guys for joining me. It's great to see you. Hey, Teresa. So, all right. Okay. So next paragraph. And they go on a little bit with this. The same idea as play by play. How did this unfold for us? This whole thing of becoming a soul. They say hesitancy, waiting. The beginning of now coincides with presence. The sense of time forming around yourselves, the sense of life forming within your own thought forms, the beginnings of now, eternal substance drifts from you. There is light within your breath, within the heavens, all around yourselves. It congeals and concentrates into living things. It's beginning times. So this is, I think, describing the beginning of time, because that's a sort of an earth construct. It's the beginning of our presence on earth. So all of these things. So it feels to me like from this, like they're saying, okay, as we were born, but we were tied to the consciousness of earth. So our souls, right, came and became part and one with earth. There is, so it's like they're saying hesitancy, waiting. There's this sense, and in the awareness of waiting, time begins, because everything starts with human thought. Right? Everything that came from us is how we created our reality. So time, the beginning of now coincides with presence. So this is two things. You're saying one, the sense of hesitancy, of waiting, that feeling created time. So cool. And then they're saying the beginning of now coincides with presence. So it's the sense of awareness, the sense of self, and that's the beginning of now. And the sense of time is coming from this feeling of waiting. So, okay, then they go on to say the sense of time forming around yourselves, the sense of life forming within your own thought form. So as souls, beginning souls, we began having our own thoughts. So we started as a thought, and then we began having our own thoughts. And those thoughts started to generate life. And those thoughts started to create our experience and our beginnings, right? The beginnings of now. They say eternal substance drifts from you. There is light within your breath, within the heavens, all around yourselves. So they're saying, we were in the process, like, yes, we were created, and then we were instantly creating. That we started to create again this sensation of time and our presence, and that everything that we emanated, all of our thoughts started to generate our shared reality. All right. Then they say that the within the heavens all around yourselves, it congeals and concentrates into living things. So this is the presence of what is the earth going to be like? How do we co-create with earth herself? And it is this, it's that light within us then congeals and concentrates into living things. It's beginning times, the beginning of our experience on earth, the beginning of our experience as humans. So super, and really as consciousness, as the conscious part, not as the physical body, because that is different and evolved differently, but as the conscious mind. Super interesting. All right, next paragraph. And Teresa's saying, I'm so glad you explain, because what they say is sometimes hard to understand. They speak like poetry. I so agree. And I love how they do it, right? I love how they speak. But yeah, it takes sometimes digesting, doesn't it? So thank you. I'm really glad that it helps for you. All right. So the next paragraph, they say, human thought forms concentrate into identity you have now, the sense of self evolving, of wanting distribution of the many selves within, of the aspects of oneself. One self divides into many. There are thought forms within him who is God, who speaks the light in love language, in essence. And you are this, the becoming of this. These thought forms arrive into humanity, and you are this, and you are the many distributions of this center source. So now we're getting into the meat of it here, and they're going to go into this more deeply. So they're saying, okay, beginning of this paragraph, human thought forms concentrate into identity you have now. And this theme of concentrating is this whole thing. This whole passage is about the concentration of light, of God's love, of God, of source light, is what this whole experience is about. So, and they'll go into that more, but human thought forms concentrate into identity. So we start out as the thoughts of source thoughts, God's thoughts is what we are born from. And then we generate our own thoughts. And then from that, that starts to concentrate. Our thoughts about ourselves start to concentrate into a sense of identity, right? At the end, they say the identity you have now, the sense of self evolving and then wanting distribution of the many selves within. So all the different aspects of ourselves, these, in the same way that God's thoughts started to populate and create us, we start to generate many selves within ourselves as we start to contemplate ourselves. So we start to generate. So we are generative, just like God is generative. So one self divides into many. So our higher self has many, many, many aspects. And that comes from the rising of thought within our higher self, right? And these are all different aspects of the same being, which is us. All right. Then there are thought forms within him who is God, who speaks in light, in love language, in essence. So this is how what God is really is love, is light. And we hear that a lot, but they're saying it, I think, clearly here. And they say, and you are this. So we are the thought forms of God. And they say, and you are the many distributions of this center source. So there's lots of us, and we are all the many thoughts of God. And not all of his thoughts, I bet, but we're certainly some of them. They don't clarify that here. I'm assuming that we are some of God's thoughts. All right. So going on, next paragraph. Your soul essence becomes this thought form of him who was spoken into light. You are thus the divine language of he who is speaking. You are the instrument of his thought form. You are this, a thought form undertaking an experience of itself. You are the soul light construct of God himself. You are many things, each of you a difference, a divergence from his primary source, this construct of his thinking. So this is like super, I know this is an intense one, and it's really conceptual. And I think that's why they tried to explain it in the way that they did, where it's like they're trying to do it play by play, because if they have to go into the nuance of it, I think it would just be beyond beyond my grasp anyways. So, okay. So in this paragraph, they're really saying what we are and what is our soul. And they're saying that our soul is, I love how they describe us. Well, let's go through the paragraph. Your soul essence becomes this thought form from him who was spoken into light. So, and that again gets to like who created God. And they're not going to address that here, but now they're hinting around that, like of him who was spoken into light. This is source. So I think presence, if light is the beginning, and then that awareness becomes God, and then God's thought forms become us. I think that's how it's going. So you are thus, they said, okay, so we are his thought forms. He says, you are thus, because we are the thought forms of God, you are thus the divine language of he who is speaking. So we are his language. We're like his words, but we're so much more than that. We are the enactment, right? So we are his language, his expression. I've heard that so many times, but I love how they call it the divine language. We are the divine language of he who is speaking. Wow. You are the instrument of his thought form, right? So you are a thought form undertaking an experience of itself. So you are the soul light construct of God himself. You are many things. So that's that idea that we are a thought form, right? But then we have thoughts about ourselves, and that generates many selves inside of us. And that's all of your past lives, all the existences you've ever been, right? That's all the many selves. So, so you are many things, each of you a divergence, a difference, a divergence from his primary source, this construct of thinking. So it's like you start with one, and then it spreads and generates, and then it spreads and generates. It's like that. It's like his thought expanded and became all of us, and then we had thoughts about ourselves, and that generated many selves within our higher self, of which we are one. This incarnation is one of those. So, all right. I hope you're still with me. This is complicated, I know, but it's also mind-blowing. And when I try to rephrase it in a way to simplify it, there's no way. It's complicated, but it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. All right. So next paragraph. And they specify here, they took a little aside, because as I was channeling, I was like, and they said, we say he, though we understand it is not meaningful in gender. We only use the language for ease to discuss. So they wanted to clarify that. So in terms of referring to God. All right. Next paragraph. They say, we wish to say there is presence. There is light among you all. There is God within each. You are constructed in this manner, a thought form divine, an essence of himself, the fabrication of his mind, as you would say. So they're just clarifying there, yes, we are the thoughts of God, or from source, however you'd like to say that. Next paragraph. From here, this point ongoing, you will find the soul's journey deconstructed, a deconstruction of the self into many parts and languages, many ways of speaking, finding the self, an eternal journey of discovery. It is an aspected ratio, a method, an undertaking in which one diverges into the many things and becomes oneself in many, many patterns and underlays, each one with the same thinking, thought form, essence, fabrication of this God light that they embody as soul essence. So I think this is really exciting, and it gets easier to follow as we keep going. But what they're saying here is that from this point ongoing, so basically once we were formed, once we came into presence and became aware of ourselves, became self-aware, then the journey changes. The journey becomes about deconstructing what we are, trying to take, it's sort of like if you got a radio and you were like, how does this thing work? Until you start taking it apart and you take all the parts apart so you can look at it and evaluate it and understand it. And that is what we are doing to ourselves, that we are taking the original God thought, the source thought that formed us, and we are deconstructing it and pulling it apart into as many minor pieces as we possibly can to better understand it in all its permutations. So that is the journey that we are on. And so they say a deconstruction of the self into many parts and languages. So many, and I like that idea of languages because it's like you can say one word in how many hundreds of different languages and mean the same thing. So that's one way of deconstructing the soul, of understanding ourselves in a new way, the spark of God that we are, that we carry. So we deconstruct the self into many parts and languages, many ways of speaking. Finding the self, an eternal journey of discovery. It is an aspected ratio. Okay, and I looked that up. And what they mean here, and they use, because our language is just too limited to really describe everything that they're trying to say. They borrow things and they use them creatively. So what they mean here is an aspect ratio is something that measures, so I looked it up, the description is the ratio of its sizes in different dimensions. We use it to describe shape. So you could say an aspect ratio, you would use to say the ratio from height and width. So if you're measuring something, you'd say, okay, the height is 5 feet across, and the height is 5 feet, the width is 3 feet. So the ratio is 5 to 3. And that's the aspect ratio that describes what that shape looks like. That's an aspect ratio. But what it's really doing is it is taking the measure of something in different dimensions, in the dimension of height and the dimension of width. So an aspect ratio takes the measure of something in different dimensions. So that is what we are doing, is we are trying to understand ourselves in different dimensions. We're taking the measure of ourselves in different dimensions. So I think it's such a creative and clever usage of aspect ratio. But that's what I believe they're saying. It is an aspected ratio. So the dimension, understanding ourselves in different dimensions, a method, an undertaking in which one diverges into many things. So we come apart and become many things, and becomes oneself in many, many patterns and underlays. So we just keep trying this. How many different ways can we take ourselves apart and look at ourselves in different lifetimes, different experiences, each one with the same thinking, thought form, essence. So we're always playing the same tune. We're always ourself, right? But we're looking at ourself in all these different ways. How are we going to respond in this circumstance? How are we going to act if this happens? That's what we're trying, all right? And so we're always embodying the same soul essence. Each of us has our own. All right, next paragraph. And in this process, the divine understanding magnifies, understanding of itself, of himself, of ourselves. All is working toward this greater magnificence of comprehension, of illumination and understanding, but not from the intellectualization that you would suppose, but from heartfelt truth, from the sense of oneself in greater variation and divergence, from that original hum that was your undertaking. There is essence of oneself, a growth of candor in speaking truth of what you are. So, and this is the purpose of it. So why are we doing this? Why are we taking ourselves apart and looking at ourselves in a million gazillion different ways and all these different incarnations and all these different circumstances that we put our souls through? They say it's the process of magnifying our understanding, magnifying our own comprehension of what it is to be this particular essence, right? This particular song of source light. And so they say understanding of itself, of himself, of ourself. So our understanding then feeds the collective understanding of the universe, right? Because we are a part of God, we're part of the universe. The more that we understand ourselves, we are an aspect of the universe that is then added to the knowledge of everything. So, but not from the intellectualization. They're saying that, so it's not from the head, but it's from the heart, right? And then they say from the truth, from the heartfelt truth, from the sense of oneself in greater variation and divergence. So it's like continually finding these new aspects from that original hum. I love that they describe that our original incarnation as a soul was a hum, like a sound, like a vibration, a frequency, right? It was a thought form, but it's also a frequency, is what created us. And that was our undertaking, so our beginning. They say there is essence of oneself, a growth of candor, so growth of just becoming more and more direct and understanding, comprehending, and speaking truth of what you are. So we talk about this about in our own journey in this incarnation, about our soul's journey and becoming more open and free with who we are. But that is also our higher self's journey, is trying to become that through our expression. All right, next paragraph. To diverge the self from this origin point and then reconstruct the self into the housing of this original placement gives the self a deeper concentration and focus in your own energy, helping yourselves to understand the chorus that sings your soul name, to understand its richness and depth, its vibration and tone. So the whole idea here in this paragraph is they're saying that we are taking ourselves apart, looking at every tiny little piece and continually breaking it down into smaller parts so that we can then put the whole thing back together again with a much deeper, richer understanding of what we are. And so that's what they're trying to say, that helping ourselves to understand the chorus that sings your soul name. How do we really understand it? It's by looking at every little piece in all these different instantiations, right? To understand its richness and depth, its vibration and tone. How cool is that? Right? I think it's amazing. All right, next paragraph. There is more there than can be spoken into any one lifetime. Therefore, you evolve into many beings. You have within you this same element of God light, but have expressed it differently into this thought form that you are now. This soul light that you contain, God's essence, it expresses now as you are speaking, breathing, emanating yourself into this body you inhabit. You are all things light. One's of himself, his emanation speaks truth forevermore. It never diminishes, never goes away, never stops. Therefore, you are eternal. So they're saying, in this paragraph, they're just getting more clarity around this idea that we have this same original hum or song that we started with, but we're breaking this apart into all these different versions of ourselves to understand ourselves better. But they're saying in every single one of those instantiations that God's light or source light is speaking through us always. In every single instantiation, we are always that source light. And they're saying you are all things light. And then they're saying that because God is eternal, that God himself emanates and speaks truth forevermore, never diminishes, never goes away, never stops. So because we are his thought forms, we also are eternal, right? So, and Teresa's saying, earth, school, and learning to be from God's source again. Yes, exactly. And so I think we've heard like the whole idea is to eventually reunite with source light. And I think this is the how. Is the idea is to take ourselves apart into so many tiny pieces to really understand ourselves in every context, the particular hum or song that we carry, and then put ourselves back together again. And when we put ourselves back together again, we can unify with source light. Yeah, right? Wow. All right, next paragraph. Within this light phase of deconstruction, your own elements come into greater understanding through the heart path. The concentration of heart knowing, of feeling the self more deeply, of sensing your own origination, sensing yourself, your truth, the harmony which you sing. It is developing a deeper resonance to your core, the fabrication of this sound more deeply felt, more deeply held, to deconstruct, to understand the feeling, to magnify this, to empower yourself to speak, to feel the light in its fullness. This is the journey you are on. So it's all about this whole thing that we are doing in terms of being incarnated as this one aspect of our higher self. And what our higher self is up to is trying to deepen the resonance of our soul song. So it's like having the soul song that we're born with, this original breath. But what happens when that soul song is played on every single instrument that's available to it, right? That same note is played every different way in every possible construction, like in a million different songs, the same note is used in all these different ways. Then you really understand the potential of that note. Like you get to the richness, the depth of what that note can do. And that is what we're trying to do for ourselves. So I love how they describe it, developing a deeper resonance to your core, right? That is what we are up to. Wow, wow, wow. Okay. This is the journey we are on. Next paragraph. It is not the intellectualization as you would have it on the earth plane, for this does not matter in the all and everything of universal light. Here, here in our construct, all things are known evenly, instigating understanding instantaneous, as though all is revealed upon inquiry without hesitation. Therefore, knowing carries no balance, no harmony, no interest. So they're saying that outside of the earth school, away from where we are, knowledge is meaningless because of the fact that everybody knows everything all the time instantly. So the idea that you have to memorize or remember things or learn things just doesn't exist. That knowledge is like being, it's like breathing. So they're saying that intellectualizing our journey doesn't make any sense to them because it's meaningless. Anything that we learn through our head, we would instantly know on the other side anyways. There's no point to that. The whole journey is through the heart. The only thing that matters is this, is the feeling, is the experience of what we're doing, is having the experience. All right. Next paragraph. And this is the last paragraph. They say, what fuels thought form energy, perpetual motion, is the desire to feel, to see through the heart space, to understand the concentration of light within, to feel another's essence. This understanding divine, yes, a concentration of light that is harbored within, to deepen, enrichen, lengthen the concentration of this. This is the journey that you are on. It is to inhabit fully the breath that you have been given by God Himself, for you are this. I love that last paragraph. I love it. And you're saying, do we need to learn what we feel to center and be? It's really about engaging in our experience fully. And I think in terms of understanding this message, it's really like our journey is about being ourselves as fully as we can possibly be. So what are the ways in which we don't express ourselves, that we limit or constrict ourselves? What are the ways that we dampen our light and hold ourselves back? And these are preventing us from having the full experience of expressing this song and feeling it in all these different iterations. So all the things that are in our way, the things that diminish our light, that's the stuff we have to work against, because we want to get to a place where we are fully expressed, because only through that process can we see what our particular song can do. What can our song be when we let it out? But so much of our human experience is about dousing our light. It's so much about like keeping ourselves small and restricting ourselves in different ways. Well, all the things we think we can't do, you know? And so it's really about, lessening that feeling, finding ways in which we can really understand ourselves and express the truth of who we are as clearly as we can, as free from outside influence. Think of all the influences that you grew up with in your family. What are the ways in which we are limiting ourselves based on conditioning, right? And that's not truth. That's not who we are. What are the negative thoughts we have about ourselves? Again, that's conditioning. So it's how much of that can we release and get closer and closer and closer to really expressing ourselves and just being totally free with who you are. And that's the goal, is to engage in life. Right. So anywhere that you're hesitating, think about that. Like, what are you hesitating about doing or living or being? Anything that draws you. And that's the idea, is to step into it, right? To be yourself as much as you possibly can, to play your note as loud as you possibly can. Right. And don't worry about who you're inconveniencing. Don't worry about, being annoying because you are being so you. Like, just be you. And so, yeah, that's the idea, is to not hold ourselves back for fear of how we're going to be perceived, or how we're going to be, how it's going to show up in the world. Yeah, to just let our freak flag fly. That's the goal. Beautiful, beautiful message, and such a cool understanding of how our soul began, and what the mission, the journey is, what it's all about. And I think it makes me think about you hear so many times when people cross over, they cross into the light, and then they see the tunnel of the light, right? And you'll hear so many people have near-death experiences where they're moving into the light, and it's so amazing and so overpowering, and they get closer and closer and closer, and then they get to a certain point where they just can't take it anymore, and then they stop, right? And then then the light goes away, or something else happens in their near-death experience. And I have always understood that as the light is resonating, that source light is resonating at such a high frequency, that we are trying to move towards it, and we can only move as high as we can cope with, like as clear as we can get in this life. The further we were able to go in that light, getting closer and closer to source, until finally we can unify with source, right? That's the idea. Like, there will be some time, a time in our existence, not necessarily our life, but in our existence, when we will be so clear and so close to source that we will move right into and merge with source. But until that time, we will only be able to move as close as we can possibly hold, given all the junk that we've got inside of us, right? All the ways in which we are dimming our light. And but this gives me a slightly different perspective, which is that if we are source to begin with, right? If we are source to begin with, and we are moving into the light, that it gives you a really different perspective as we're trying to move back to that whole integration. So it definitely gives me a lot to think about. You're saying, this is speaking to me. I've been wanting to play the violin again, but all of a sudden I feel like, what will my neighbors think? My partner think? Well, they want me to shut up, and then I don't play. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're all going to hold you accountable now. You have to play your violin. We've all heard you now. You're out of the closet. So we're all going to be expecting you to play. I love that you brought that up. And I know that is so true for all of us in so many different ways. There's things that we think of doing, or ways we'd like to be. Like, how many times have you been somewhere where people were dancing and you thought that looks fun, but you didn't do it, right? Where you felt self-conscious. I've done that, where you see it and you're like, oh, I want to jump up. They look like they're having a great time, but you just feel like, oh, I'm not sure how to do it, or how do I start? You get embarrassed or something. And yeah, I think it's just to really be aware every time we do that, we're dimming our light. And that's directly against the mission of our soul's journey. You're saying, thank you. I'll need to watch a few times. It's a beautiful message. This one taught us a lot. Thank you so much. For me too, like this one, I am going to take some time to process, because I just have so many other thoughts spinning off of this. So if you guys have things that come up for you, or realizations or awarenesses that relate to this, please do share them with us, because I think it's going to be really beneficial for all of us in terms of really understanding the full depth of this, and what we can take from it. So thank you guys so much for sharing this with me. I really appreciate your input, because we can all learn together from this stuff. I hope you guys have a phenomenal weekend, and I will see you next Friday live.